Welcome to Future Foodcast. I'm Pam Line-Miller, your host. Have you heard the term regenerative agriculture? Well, today we are going to take a dive into that as well as other topics with Dominik Klauser. He is the Global Director for Regenerative Agriculture for the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative Platform. Welcome to the show, Dominik.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to dive into this. You know, regenerative agriculture has been brought up multiple times, and so I'm looking forward to hearing your perspective and diving into some of the issues. But tell us first of all what the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative Platform is and does, if you would.
No, thank you. I can do that. So the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative Platform, or SAI Platform in short, we are a membership organization, and we're basically uniting major companies and major brands from the food and beverage sector to work pre-competitively and collaboratively on sustainability, particularly sustainability of raw material supply chains. So our history goes back over 20 years, where we were initially funded by Nestle, Unilever, and Danone at the time where they noticed actually sustainable supply chains, working with farmers, engaging farmers in more sustainable farming practices. That's a pre-competitive endeavor. Not single companies can do it on their own. They want to work together. They want to share the same message to farmers, share the same information, we built that inspiration together. So that's how we developed. 20 years later, we have more than 200 members. So we have grown quite big. And I think most of the leading food and beverage companies we are proud to call them members, and we are very proud to call them very engaged members. So they keep me busy every day, and sometimes even more than that. So it's a pleasure to work with them.
Well, Nestle, Unilever, and Danone are very large players in the food industry, and for them to have the vision 20 years ago to come together on a sustainability effort, that's really great. And then you've been able to build on that foundation, obviously, with them initially being the initial startup members. So over 200, that's quite an accomplishment. But there are a lot of companies that are interested in sustainability. So how do you serve your members?
Yeah, no, thank you, Pam. I can tell you, how we want to, or how we are supporting our members. Of course, as I mentioned before, our objective is to improve the sustainability of member supply chains, engage in more sustainable practices. And how we do that is basically by two action areas. The first one is member engagement, bringing members together, pre-competitive discussions on sustainability trends, what are upcoming regulations, what are upcoming policies, but also then inspire from what good looks like. So if, from creating a shared learning, or, some members are further ahead than others, so that they can share their experience and drag others or bring others with them on the journey. So a lot of communication between members and, discussions that we moderate. On the other hand, and arising from that, there is an activity area that we call industry solutions, and this is basically where we use that wisdom we create through these discussions, through engaging also with academia, with farmers directly, to develop solutions for the industry, particularly standards on what would good look like in terms of sustainable supply chains. I think the most common or most well-known example is the Farm Sustainability Assessment, FSA, which is a business-to-business solutions to make sure that sustainable production gets, or standards for sustainable production can travel the value chain all the way from farmers through traders to processors, and that there is a visibility and there's accountability along the value chain for that.
Very nice.
So that are the two action areas. Sorry.
Yeah, and the first one, to bring together, one of the benefits of just being able to associate with other companies that are wanting to achieve some of the similar goals and share best practices, like you said, what does good look like, and being able to glean from other members and what they're doing so that everyone can do better and get some good ideas. Or maybe a company can say, we tried this, that didn't work as well, and save another company the time and trouble and money that would be taken up of them trying to duplicate the same thing. I mean, I think as a member, that would be a great benefit that I would want to associate with other companies in a non-competitive way, because the companies in the food industry are competing with each other in certain ways. But this is a platform where they kind of put that aside to focus on topics that matter, is what I'm hearing you say.
No, definitely. And they have, I mean, as an industry, they have a couple of shared challenges. One is, the sustainability and the reliability of supply chains. I mean, we see a lot of external pressure points like climate change, like resource-based degradation that, we have to work as an industry. Otherwise, we'll find it difficult. It will have an effect on reliability, on prices and so forth. I think increasingly also, governments want to ensure that sustainable production standards are met, civil society. So it's really something where we need to work pretty competitively to drive the change we want to. And I think the other thing that always, you mentioned it, bringing together industry players, sharing experience. And I'm only at SAI Platform since a year. But I really was impressed about the safe space we can create for having these discussions. Sometimes, also learning from failures. And I think it's really important. It's learning or inspiring people to change behavior is much more powerful than imposing or, pushing. So we really want to bring in that inspirational aspect of improving. Yeah,
and there are a lot of regulatory pressure or trends, new regulations that are coming into play in all of these areas that the companies need to respond to and figure out how to best meet, correct? So you help with that as well.
Yes, we do help. It's not our key priority because, we're a global organizations and regulations sometimes are quite different. What you have in North America is not necessarily what we have in Europe or what there is happening in South America. So big picture policy changes, we have them on the radar and we work on them, or we work with our members on them, for sure. I think the other aspect that is quite important, we want to go beyond just being within the legal confinement. We want to push our members to take one further step in terms of implementing sustainability protocols in their supply chains. So compliance isn't good enough, I would say.
Compliance, yeah. Well, and the different industries have different challenges too. So I know you had mentioned you try to put, maybe dairy together or people that grow crops together or work in meat or beef together because they might have unique challenges that don't cross.
Yeah, no, this is quite important. So we are, our consultation and discussion forums are commodity or commodity type specific. So one is crops, another one is dairy, as you mentioned. The third one is around beef production. And they face different, regulatory pressures, but they also, and I think this is quite important to bear in mind about agriculture, they have a different influence on the environment or different interrelation with the environment. So for instance, in dairy, animal welfare is very important, of course, as are greenhouse gas emissions. Whereas in crops, biodiversity loss, soil health and aspects like that might be equally important or even more important than, in brackets, just greenhouse gas emissions. And that's also what we want to bring across. We don't want to have a sort of like a tunnel view on GHG emissions, that this is the only sustainability indicator, but really that we look across water, soil, biodiversity, and climate. Where does agriculture impact our ecosystems?
Very nice. Well, let's dive into what you're global director of, which is the regenerative agriculture space. Can you share with us how that even came to be? I mean, it seems to me it's a fairly new term.
It is relatively new. So well, yes and no. I think regenerative agriculture exists since the 1980s, but it never really picked up globally. But it had its origins in the 1980s. And I think then from 2015 onwards, there was quite a spike of interest, especially also from the industry, in adopting regenerative agriculture and, using it as a concept to improve the sustainability of production and supply chains. So that was, that's sort of the history that since 2015 this started to come about. The challenge with Regen Ag, in a way, it's a challenge. In a different, if you looked at it different, it's also an opportunity. It's not. It's quite vaguely defined. It's a broad church concept, and there are risks of greenwashing on one hand, but on the other hand, you can leave it quite flexible for farmers to do what's best for their operations. But coming back to the challenge, what we saw and what the industry saw is everybody, or many companies, jumped on the Regen Ag. They developed their own interpretation of the concept of Regen Ag, and that led to many different frameworks being there. And that was sort of like the time period 2015 to 2022, where every big consumer good company had their own interpretation of Regen Ag. The challenge of that is farmers didn't know what to do. Should I follow the Nestle protocol? Should I follow the Unilever protocol? Whatever, it's quite complicated. So in 2021, and this is by the end, I'm answering your question. The industry came together and mandated and resourced SAI Platform to come together as to use SAI Platform to unify the definition of what the Regen Ag is for the whole industry. To develop a framework that supports that unified definition, and that is then subsequently adopted by the industry, and that's what we're working on at the moment, creating that framework and the system, also creating a system that allows for Regen Ag claims to travel along the value chain, so that farmers know what to do to be regenerative, and then that production can be tracked back to the farm and be incentivized by our member companies or even consumers at the end of the day.
Yeah, and that's genius. I mean, that's exactly what needs to happen, is some kind of standardization for Regen Ag, so that we know what that is, and those that are involved in complying and reaching those determinative levels and goals, they know what to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we to create some level of guidelines that say, if you did that and that, you can consider yourself being regenerative, and therefore you can sell it to these market channels, or you can qualify for a premium price. And I think that's what we hear from many of our member companies. They have made commitments towards sourcing volumes of raw material from regenerative agriculture, or having hectares under regenerative agriculture, but they now want us to create that, that's a bit rough said, the rule book for what this means. And
what are some of the targets within that, Dominic?
I can give you some that are in the public domain. So, for instance, talking about our founding members, Nestle, for instance, says that by 2030, they want 50% of their raw material coming from regenerative agriculture. So quite a substantial ambition, given the fact also that we are already in the year 2024. They also have quite a financial commitment behind that. They want to invest in regenerative agriculture, so helping them channel that investment.
Yeah,
it's also great.
Yeah, and I guess I'm also thinking like targets for what we want to make changes in for regenerative agriculture, like water or soil, or like you mentioned, biodiversity. Those kind of, what categories do I look at? I think you had mentioned 4 before.
Yeah. No, I can. So I can give you a bit more detail about that. So basically, our framework is built around 4 categories, where we think that agriculture has a big impact on the environment. That's, as you mentioned, that's water, that's soils, that's biodiversity, and it's climate. And just to give you some illustration, rough illustrations, top of the head, but agriculture is responsible for 80% of freshwater withdrawal globally. So it has an immense impact on water availability. It's a major driver of biodiversity loss because of land use change, because of intensive production. And I don't want to say that in a judgmental way, but biodiversity is affected by agriculture. Soil, we lose soils by the day because of erosion, because of soil fertility issues, but also because we just expand soil under concrete, urban areas. So we have to be judicious with how we, in maintaining soil health. And of course, climate. It's an important factor. Roughly 25% of greenhouse gas emissions globally are claimed to come from agriculture, although I have to give a bit of there's always, how you segment this, it depends on how you segment it. So a big chunk of this 25% is also land use loss, deforestation, or land use change, deforestations and other things. So it's not all just from doing agriculture,
Right.
but it's important. Yeah.
And so I guess for a company to claim that they, are working on regenerative agriculture, like they don't have to do all four of these. It might not apply, but a couple of them, right?
Yes, no, exactly. So I think the one thing I learned in my 15 years of agronomy is that agriculture is very, very context specific. So depending on where you farm and what you farm, you have a different impact on the environment. So I think it would be unfair to farmers to ask them to improve on all of these four domains. Mm-hmm. And I think as I said, in dairy, maybe greenhouse gas emissions are more, are bigger than in arable or some of the arable crops. So you have to set different priorities. So what we say at the moment, and we're still on this is still, a debate we have with a scientific advisory board. We have a SAI Platform. We are with farmers and with other academians. But the idea would be to have at least two of these impact areas covered, the two most important ones. And how we do that is, if you engage in regenerative agriculture, the first step you would do is a context analysis where you say, okay, I'm farming in that context. So water is very scarce. I'm doing irrigation, so I have to improve my water use efficiency. Or I'm in an area where there's a lot of biodiversity, but it's quite, it's at the risk of losing that biodiversity because of land use change or whatever. So then biodiversity would be your priority. And you have to have at least two of them covered.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for giving us that context. And I know you talked about an example with the gas emissions at Brazil and eucalyptus trees as an example for our audience to understand, what some of the situations are and what the impacts can be. If you would share that example with them, I think that would be really helpful to visualize.
No, I can do that. And I think it's just an illustration for two things. Context matters, as I said, and trade-offs. We are in an imperfect world. So you always have trade-offs between performance indicators and whatever. So the example is about a project that I didn't do in that role. I did do it I was supporting in a previous role where the project scope was around reducing greenhouse gas emissions and sequestering greenhouse gas in agroforestry. So it was quite a successful project in the way that we planted thousands of hectares of eucalyptus trees in Brazil. So in terms of greenhouse gas emission reductions, it was very successful. The challenge around it is that eucalyptus are not native species in South America. And it's a biodiversity desert. You basically only have eucalyptus. So if you do that in a biodiversity-rich part of the world, you lose biodiversity. It also uses quite a bit of water. So you might compete with water. It wasn't irrigated in that context, but it just shows you that maybe if biodiversity would have been the indicator we went for, we definitely wouldn't have planted a eucalyptus forest there. Right. And that just shows to me that, you always have to understand where you are in the world and what really is important, and then make the right decision. And maybe you then go for, there's a trade-off to be had.
Yeah, and I think to your point of context mattering, that's why it's so important for these industries to get together and figure out, or the farmer, depending on what area they're working in, so that they do have a similar context and can share what is good within the variables that are most important to their particular environment, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that's very important. What I want to add to this is oftentimes, you have the advantage that if you go for sustainable farming practices, they might be good for greenhouse gas emissions reductions, but they also might be good for biodiversity at the same time. So you sometimes have these, I don't want to call them silver bullets, but you have approaches that tick many boxes. And we saw that in many parts of the world where this was implemented and led to good impact on a variety of indicators.
Yeah, and another thing that is the analytics of this. Like now we have some technology that can give us some data, and I know that your platform helps with supplying, in the sustainability area, some of the numbers that companies can use to make these decisions.
Yeah, so this is something we have now. We put quite a lot of effort into at SAI Platform, because as you said, if we talk about outcomes and if we talk about performance, you would want to have some level of quantification or progress measurement in place. However, that's not always that easy to be done, especially not to be done in a cost-efficient way. And we learned it from members. These were confidential discussions, so I don't name them, but we oftentimes see that quite a big proportion of a Regen Ag budget is actually just used for data collection and data curation. But with that, you don't drive any impact. You just measure, you don't do. And what we want to develop now is sort of like actionable, pragmatic approaches to quantifying. I deliberately don't say measuring, I say quantifying impact. And this could be using indicators, proxies. So instead of measuring biodiversity, you could measure habitat. How much forest is there left? That's usually quite easy with satellite-based imagery. You can do that. Or, same for soil health. You measure just a number of smaller, easier indicators rather than doing a full soil biodiversity assessment, because it's quite costly, and in many parts of the world you can't do that. So we're working on these protocols, and we should be able to release something by the end of the year on that.
That's very exciting. I mean, to be able to decide what's helpful and what's not, and weighing the cost benefit of each of these items that you are trying to figure out and measure what they are. So that's really exciting. Is there anything else that SAI Platform is involved in that you would like to bring to our audience?
I think, a couple of things. I always like to promote what we're doing. So just on that, I think what we're doing is oftentimes what you can do is you have a good level of confidence that a certain farming practices improves your performance on an outcome. So if you do, for instance, no-till agriculture, you have a quite high level of confidence that this will improve your water efficiency. So we are working with academia on identifying which practices lead to which outcomes, so that you can then only monitor practice adoption, which is in relative terms easier than measuring the outcome directly. We also, this is an important year for the Regen Ag program, because we want to release our updated version of the Regenerative Agriculture framework at the end of October this year. This will not just include the framework and the definition of what the outcomes are and what the impact areas are, but also a claims verification system or an assurance system where if you want to make, as a consumer good company or as a farmer cooperative, if you want to make a claim about how many hectares you have under regenerative agriculture, you can have that assured or verified using our protocols. And that finally also includes a lot of guidelines on how to collect data, how to process data, and so forth. So we're working quite heavily on that, but I think this will really help shift Regen Ag, or the adoption of Regen Ag, to the next level, industry-wide.
Yeah, just providing again those to quantify what's happening out there and be able to give frameworks and then update that framework as you learn more. And as you said, figuring out if like inputs versus outputs, if we do this, it should lead to this, and just helping farmers and others involved in the food industry make better decisions in the area, right? And that's what the whole goal is, I think. Well, Dominic, thank you so much for being with us and sharing this with our listeners. I know that it was a wealth of information, and I learned a lot, like to use quantify instead of measure, which I didn't always do perfectly, and I apologize, but I hope our audience has enjoyed it as well. And if you like this episode, please comment and let us know your thoughts, ask questions. We answer every one. Until next week, I'm Pam Line-Miller.
Thanks for listening to Future Foodcast. Future Foodcast is powered by Farm to Plate, the leading food blockchain platform. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date with the very latest innovations in the food industry.